All
Hello, and
right.
thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Tiffany. This is Pat Wagner with Pattern Research in Denver, Colorado, and the program today is dealing with hostile and potentially dangerous library users' behavior. One thing I want to say right up front, this is a complicated topic, and oftentimes the questions people want to ask will take 3 or 4 hours. So I don't charge for phone or email consultation. You can reach me at pat@patternresearch.com. And unless you're telling me you're going to commit a felony, all our conversations are confidential. Okay. So today we're talking about dealing with people. I have to also say that this project is made possible by an LSTA Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And we should all, as library people, be very, very grateful for them as well. So the key idea today is, are all hostile library customers dangerous? Well, the truth is that it's not that everybody's going to be dangerous, but you have to kind of plan as if someone might turn out to be dangerous. In the same way that I bet that you carry insurance on your car, not because you're planning for somebody to run into you, but you want to be prepared if something unseemly happens. So we're not being paranoid, we're just being prepared. And that preparation eliminates most of the issues that you might have to deal with. One of the first times I presented this program was back in the day in Buffalo, New York. And Buffalo, New York at the time had one ginormous building, and it was, let's say, a kind of a gritty city. They had a lot of issues going on with certain kinds of difficult people coming into the library, let's say it that way. And I did a program for the managers, and we had like 50 people in the room, supervisors and managers. Plus, we had the security guards who were, they all looked like ex cops and ex military with guns. Okay. And we were going through the program, and I was getting some pushback from some of the people in the room. Oh, that's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. And I was so pleased and validated when the head of security, big guy, right, kind of walked up swaggering a little bit like John Wayne. And he spoke to the audience and he said, if you listen to what this young lady said, I was 50 at the time, it would eliminate 95% of the calls to security. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about today, I've learned on the advice of police officers, security guards, and whatever. So I just want to say that as we go through. This is not ivory tower. This is how we try to de escalate conflict and make the library a safer place for everybody. So what we need to do is to basically, and this is one of the key things, is to practice consistent courtesy with everyone who comes in to the library, no matter who they are, what they look like, how they're dressed, how they're speaking, their age, their socioeconomic status, and at the same time, and this is the little contradiction, trust your gut. And we'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. So there's 5 outcomes for the program today. First of all, we hope that this inspires you to ensure that everybody who works at the library knows what to do in any kind of emergency. One library I visited, and this was a rural library in the Southwest in a county of about, let's say, 1,800 people. The library director called me in to do a staff training, and she said, I'm so proud of our emergency procedure manual. And all of her staff looked at each other and said, what manual? And she said, oh, you know that manual I sent out 2.5 years ago. Well, it took her an hour and a half to find it in the files and make copies. This was before electricity and the internet. And it turned out she thought she had given it to everyone. So you can't just give people a piece of paper and say, this is what to do in emergency. You really have to talk it through, because one of the keys of dealing with problematic situations is the more confident the staff is knowing what we're supposed to do, step 1, 2, 3, 4, the more confident they're going to kind of portray that to anyone who's an opportunistic bad actor. And they're kind of likely to say, not going to work here. I'll go someplace else to make trouble. To understand, one of the key things in personal relationships is de-escalation. So that idea that we hope we've given you some ideas about lowering that drama, the theater when you're dealing with difficult people. The issue of consistent responses. Now, this is something I've changed my mind about over the years. In the last few years, I really think consistency is really important so that everyone who comes to that front desk, whether it's the circ desk, reference, whatever, is treated the same, gets the same information with no special favors for friends or relatives, because you have to remember that there are people watching your interactions you have with other people, and they're taking their clues from your interactions. So that consistent response to everybody, not just the challenging people, I think is really important. Kind of to do an audit of some of the security features of your workplace. And I think it's a great idea, if you haven't already, most of you probably have, is to have local police, sheriff's department, town marshals, whatever, be able to come in and look for potential hotspots, which are usually blind alleys. And yes, I've run into library boards where the trustees are, they kind of have a depression era mindset. So they don't want to spend the extra 10 bucks to put in another light bulb in the back of the stacks or something like that. We call that a false economy. So just like you have the fire guy come in, make sure that you're okay. Having advice from police officers, I think, is always a great idea. And when I say institute regular safety programs with professionals, I really believe that it helps the staff enormously if you have people in, again, from social services, folks from legal aid, people from your local legal department, whether you're a city or county library or library district, whatever, and also professionals from, again, law enforcement and social services to come in on a regular basis and talk to staff, because they're the experts on dealing with these situations, and they're the ones who can validate what you're doing and also tell you, no, no, don't do that. Because sometimes the good hearts that we have actually make things more difficult, which is interesting. So the agenda today, we're going to talk first of all how we influence the behavior of others. One of my clients here in Colorado, who's come to several of my programs, actually stood up in the middle of one of my workshops and said, Pat, I come to your workshops every year at the Colorado Library Association. When are you going to let me blame other people? When is it not going to be my responsibility? And everyone started laughing, and she was laughing too. And I said, I don't teach that class. So we're really going to talk a lot about the things we do consciously and unconsciously that can trigger other people and even put that chip on their shoulder. Being really good about setting limits on what is acceptable. And one of the, excuse me, just little thing caught my throat. I'm not contagious. One of the things that we talk about is that my library clients that I've worked with for many years are great people, and they're nice. It's not just South Carolina nice, it's everyone's nice. And sometimes you have to set that limit. You don't have to be mean, and that's why consistency is important. So we're going to talk about setting limits. That idea of don't engage emotionally. And this is very hard these days, particularly when I work with clients who, for example, have their library open and there's a requirement to wear a mask, and somebody comes in from the general public and does not want to wear a mask, and they're angry, upset. They're upset about the election. They're upset about the aftermath of the election. I mean, it goes on and on. And if you have strong feelings about that, it's really easy to engage. And after a while, we don't know who the good guys and the bad guys are. We just see two people fighting with each other. We want to stop that. So this is an important part. And then some techniques from cognitive behavioral psychology. I am not a therapist, okay? I don't care about your inner child, but there's things that I have found work, and they're the distractions, the alternatives, and the disengagement. And by the way, as an aside, all of you who've been parents and or work with little guys have probably used these successfully in dealing with kids when they're starting to kind of churn out of control. So you probably already know this stuff. And then finally, trust your gut, when to call the authorities. And we also have a resource list, which I hope you find useful as well. Okay, so there are going to be several assignments during this program, and these are things that you can comment about in the chat box. You don't have to be just a question, you can comment, or they're ones also you can take back to your libraries. So one of the things would be to grade your library right now. And here are 5 ideas to think about how well we're dealing with the issue of preparing for potentially hostile and dangerous patrons. Are there cheat sheets at every station in the library? I'll say that uh, the internet is wonderful and online things are wonderful. I'm old school, kill some trees and have brightly colored in some ugly pink color cheat sheets at every single desk and station throughout the library. So if something happens, somebody can look at the sheet and know what to do. And on the sheet would be the emergency phone tree, who to call, right? Your director's at a conference, your assistant director is at a different conference, your branch manager or building manager is out of the building. 3 people are out with the flu. I mean, all these kind of things. Who do you call? Do you call your trustees? Do you call the city manager? Who is it that you're supposed to call? Staff meetings with leadership, and that means that with your director, your appointed or elected board, might be city council, that there are people who come in, hopefully more than once a year, to talk about issues, update on local statistics about, problems that are happening in the community and so on, to support the staff. Because one problem is that if you live in a community that is seeing kind of new people coming in who are difficult. Like we've had a problem here in Colorado since we legalized marijuana, not with, hordes of doped up zombie, stoners wandering through the streets. That's not the problem. But we've had a kind of a criminal class come to Colorado that weren't there before, making it difficult for everyone, including libraries. So there are frequent meetings with law enforcement and publications about who's out there and how to deal with them in a way that's respectful and you still set the limit about things. So I like people to feel prepared. And then finally, with the supervisory, a supervisory meeting consistently with the supervisors and managers talking together, whether it's one building or multiple buildings, to ensure consistent responses, that everybody is on the same page. I don't know how many times I have to say that people who intend ill are opportunistic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you can give yourself a grade and decide, yeah, we do all this stuff pretty well. So maybe part of the program today will be validating you in the good things that you do. Then, and this is kind of the elephant in the room for some of my clients, we're not talking about people who come into the library. We're actually talking about people who work at the library. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. I won't tell you where it happened, but I'm not making this up. It was a large academic library in the West, and I went out and did 2 days worth of training and so on. People liked me. We had a good time. I came back to Denver and I got a phone call and they said, we have a real problem employee. She actually attended your program and likes you. And if you come back here to our state and work with her, it'll work out really well. And I said, well, what is she doing? And they told me, and I was just stunned. She screams at people, has hissy fits, not just with the staff, but the students and faculty of the university, throws tantrums, throws books, pouts for days. I mean, just like, oh my goodness. And I said, how long has this been going on? And they said, 30 years. And I said, well, I don't think she's the crazy one then. And it sort of went downhill from there. But once in a while, you get an employee who's having a bad day, or they just are at a position in their life that they're under a lot of stress, like many of us are right now. Or you have volunteers coming in who you may not have immediate authority over. Maybe they're working in your book sale. They come in with another organization or somehow their behavior is not the best. So one of the things we need to do for our personnel, everybody, is to make sure that we have a yearly program on personnel issues. And not just hand people pieces of paper. And I like to have authorities in the room to back up what's going on. So does the library have a trusted and speedy grievance policy and respond well to questions about employees' rights? And what exactly are those versus what are the rights of management or what's in the union contract? people develop kind of mythologies about what is legal and ethical. It's based on something they heard 5 years ago in a whispered conversation. So I think it's really good to have those. These are the rules. Here's the rights of this group. Here's the rights of this group. Here's the legal things. And I don't run them. I mean, I don't give the advice because I'm not a lawyer, but I have facilitated a number of them. And afterwards, inevitably, people come up to me and said, I've worked here 10 years. I never knew that. Right. And clarifying issues about, okay, here's a touchy issue. Some people don't like to do these. They say, oh, we do not want to open up the can of worms. And I'm like, no, open those worms, let them fly. Otherwise, things brood and there's problems. Otherwise, take all threats seriously. I've had people, horror stories of people threatening death and destruction. I'm going to get you, any threat that comes from anyone inside or outside the library, you treat seriously, right? We take threats seriously. Um, and you know what? If you have people who just like to mouth off, this is going to be kind of a heads up for them that we do take that threat seriously and work with people about that. And finally, no one is exempt from the rules. And you and I have probably seen situations where there's someone who has been a great employee for 20, 25 years, and then something happens. Now, I'm 70, and I have friends who are older whose behavior started to change as they got older. How honest can I be? Maybe my behavior is changing. Oh dear. But just because someone has worked there for 20, 25 years doesn't mean they should be able to allowed to quote get away with stuff. Just had this last week with a small library in not rural, just say small town, Wisconsin. And this is exactly what was happening, where the director said, I inherited this library where there's people who've been here 25 years and their behavior is outrageous. But people keep saying, I can't do anything about it because they're a loved and trusted employee and they feel entitled. So to create a safe and secure place for everyone to get their business done and treat themselves well, nobody is exempt from the rules. Nobody. So we'll be talking now about how do we influence the behavior of others, and it's often in the details of how we interact with other people. So one thing I tell people that I look for, and it's hard because I'm not here going into your library and watching people. When I'm asked to come in and deal with these issues, I don't do secret shopper stuff, but I watch and I listen and I learn. And one of the things I notice is that some people have what I call the disapproval or the mom face. And when you get upset with a patron, when you get upset with a coworker, some people, I bet you know one or two, put on the mom face. And they think that silent disapproval works. But what they don't realize is, particularly with young people, um, it's very likely that the young person's attitude started with their being sensitive to how other people treat them. And so sometimes in watching, it's really evident to me that unfortunately it was the adult behind the counter who actually sort of started things off by putting the chip on other people's shoulders. I spent some time working with young people, and I actually worked with gang kids in the Southern Bronx in New York. These were not happy dancing West Side Story people. These were kids oftentimes who had criminal records, even as young as they were. But when they knew and could see and hear that the staff I worked with, I was one of the workers, we treated them with respect. Oh my goodness, they would do anything for us. They would. So watch out for the silent disapproval face. You can use that on your kids and grandkids, but if you use it at the library, it doesn't work. And by the way, use it on your kids and grandkids, understanding some of them will not come to your funeral. I've seen that happen too. So the first thing to know, and authors have different responses to this, 86% to 95 to 97% of people's opinion of someone is made up in those first 5, 10, 15, 30 seconds. And it's the look on your face, the tone of your voice, the posture and mannerisms, and the first words out of your mouth, right? And so in the same way, that we dress well, and if you're a woman or a man who likes to look really good, you accessorize well, right? You look good. So we're concerned about that, but sometimes we don't pay attention to how we look to other people, particularly people who don't know us, who don't know that we have a heart of gold, don't know that we're a sweetheart, don't know that we like people and we save puppies and all that good stuff. All they see is that grouchy face, making them feel that they're not wanted. We also have to look at the physical environment. And, it's tough if you're short-staffed. And I know most of the libraries I work with around the country are dealing with the short staff issue. So one of the things we deal with is what we call the community policing strategies of keeping the outside clean and picked up, the inside of the library that's clean, and even well-run libraries start getting clutter. To unclutter things, look like you're, as my mom would say, put together well. And I have done what I call an environmental scan, sometimes of libraries that say they're having increasing issues with, quote, problem patrons. And basically, the way the library looks is sort of laid back, and the library thinks it's homey and folksy. What I do is I think it looks kind of lazy, and it doesn't have to look like a robotic, clinic from the 23rd century or something. But I spend a lot of time saying, remove this clutter, remove this clutter. We live in central Denver, in an older neighborhood about 5 blocks from gang territory, and we've lived in the same house for 36 years. And we have had no vandalism. And one of the things is that we go out of our way to make our property look nice and clean and pretty, lots of flowers. And people pass us by, you know? I mean, it's interesting. The bad actors rather pass us by. So that's something to think about. What the staff wears, and even if you're in a very relaxed library, I know libraries that have had to put in place certain standards about this is what we this is what we wear to look for as professionals. And several professions like the doctor and nursing profession sort of moved away from having formal uniforms and kind of a neat and clean look, and they've moved back to that because they said it improves the sort of tacit authority we have in situations. Again, as I said before, how you are seen as treating other people. And what are the first signs they read at your library? What do the signs say about are they welcomed, or do you just have a list of thou shalt nots to make everybody say, well, I guess I shouldn't be coming in here. I'm not really welcomed at all. Uh, we have a little business. We've been in business 44 years, and over 40 of those working with libraries. And people have complimented me over the years about my employees. Oh, Pat, your employees are so wonderful. You are such a good trainer. And I say, no, I'm not a good trainer. It's not that good. You know what, though? I'm good at hiring, and I hire people who are emotionally mature. What does that mean? I look for people who, first and foremost, have a calm demeanor, right? They don't have little drama fits about everything going on. They love to learn. They love to learn. I hired a friend of mine's brother who had been in prison for a couple of years for drugs, and he got out, got clean, couldn't find a job because of his record. We had him in, and during the interview, he said, I don't have credentials. I'm a high school dropout, but I know a lot about computers, and he was terrific. And I said, we have a lot of new things here. What do you think about learning new things? He said, oh, I love to learn new stuff. And he was terrific. He went on to bigger and better things, but he was a terrific employee for 2.5 years because he loved to learn. And also, wow, his interpersonal skills were awesome. Treat everybody with respect, please and thank you. Understanding personal boundaries about what we do with other people, what we don't do with other people. Um, I don't hire people who whine. I like to hire people who say, even if it's not my mistake, it's my responsibility to clean things up. People very good humoredly saying the old, my bad, I'll fix this up. And I tell people, I live in Colorado. It just snowed overnight. And it is not my fault it snows in Colorado, but it's my husband and my legal and ethical responsibility to keep our walk clean, on behalf of our neighbors. So I want people who will say, yeah, my bad, I'll fix it up. And don't spend 20 minutes telling me why it's not their fault. I don't need that. Um, to really understand they're part of a team. I'm not much for prima donnas. My husband wanted us to put a sign up on the wall that said a prima donna free zone. So, and we have people who are brilliant, who are degreed, not degreed. I don't care if they can do the job. And we aren't running the emergency room of a children's hospital here. Uh, and I can say that for a lot of libraries, we can teach great people how to do the work. It lowers the impact on everybody if everyone who works at the library is also thinking, how is my behavior impacting other people? They are good humored about people. I actually not just like kids, I like teenagers. I even like boy teenagers, right? I like teenage boys. Even when they're acting out, they're funny. I don't take it personally. I have to like them. And one of my rules with public libraries is that even if you don't work in the children's section or YA, you still have to like kids and teenagers. Just because you're a highly paid, credentialed, brilliant reference librarian, you can't tell me, oh, I'm sorry, I don't deal with the young people. And I know it shocks you. Never happens in South Carolina, but I've had people say, oh, no, not me. That they have a life outside of work, so they have balance in their life, and the most important things in their life don't happen at work, so they have a sense of perspective. That they can build and maintain healthy relationships with other people, and they have a sense of humor about themselves, which means they have a sense of perspective. So, in the future, this is probably the kinds of people you work with today. In the future, also think about that's the kind of people I want to hire, not just looking at their credentials and experience. It's about, are they adults who can deal with the little hiccups of life and not take things personally? So, again, as I said before, people who do bad stuff are opportunistic. They look for people who appear to be weak, right? Who don't look like they can stand up for themselves. They look for those physical and virtual dark corners where they can steal or hurt people or whatever. And they actually look for the chance to do wrong. Are they everybody? No. Most people aren't like this. These are the 5 or 10%, depending on your community, that you just want to say, we want to make it so you're going to go someplace else. And if you do start something, we're prepared to de escalate and set limits as necessary. So one thing we have to watch out for, and this is something that I see sometimes in my work, is that some libraries, and not just libraries, obviously, but some libraries will start devolving to two levels of service, even with a frontline staff that says we treat people well. And I'm just basing this on what I've seen and heard personally and what I've been told by your colleagues around the United States. One level of service are for people we know and like, people who look like us, usually same age and socioeconomic status, and yes, in some cases, ethnicity and skin color and so on, and for people who are nice, right? Like, you got to be nice to me before I'm nice to you. That's some people's view of customer service. On the other hand, we have a different level of service for people we don't know and we don't like. Maybe we have a history with them, people who don't look like us, and people who are, quote, unpleasant. And that's kind of a danger where people will justify how would you say, less level of service for this person who we'll call the stranger than they will for people who they know. And you probably are a tax supported institution. So that's kind of against the rules, folks. What can I say? It's against the rules to have two levels of service. And by the way, the more inconsistent you are, the more likely that you're going to have problems with everybody in your library. We also have to look at the supervisors. Okay, what if, as I mentioned before, supervisors are not on the same page? Different sites, different departments have different rules. What if you have a one building library and the supervisors and folks are only there during 9 to 5 weekdays? No supervisors on weekends or evenings. And it's not that I want supervisors to be there to micromanage, but I do want them to be there to notice in a sense of oversight inconsistencies and to see and hear problems that might not come to the attention to the administrative offices during the week. I am a big opponent of small libraries who think they can get away with just having one person to staff a business, a building, maybe on a Sunday from 1 to 5 or something. I don't care who it is or what arguments you give me. You never set it up so there's only one person in the building. And I have advised people to quit, and I have talked to library boards about that. And unfortunately, those opportunistic people, that's something they delight in. Let's find the building, the library, the store, whatever, with just one person. By the way, one of the ways we deal with it in one situation, and this was in the upper Midwest in a library that had a little branch out in the country, and there was only one person there, is we went to the local American Legion post offering free coffee and donuts to the nice veterans there. So at any given time, there were 2 or 3 veterans with their hats and all their medals, all those cool buttons they have from their American Legion meetings, sitting around talking and reading the newspaper. So the person who was behind the counter was never alone. Never alone worked very well. And we need to know about bad behaviors. We need to know. So sometimes the weak link is that supervisors aren't taking this seriously, in my opinion. Okay. So here's an assignment for you. And um, you can tell other people you're doing it, by the way. It doesn't affect the outcome. If you are either working at a service desk or working in the library so you can see the interactions with other people, if you watch the faces of your coworkers as they interact with your library customers, what does this show you about their opinions regarding the people they're serving? Do you see a disconnect where people put on one face for some people and a different face for other people? At the same time, if you listen to the voices, listen to people talking on the phone, or turning your head slightly if you're at a service desk so you can hear the tone of voice people use, what do you notice? And we have run this in libraries, and people tell me, oh, we have great customer service, great customer service. And they do this little exercise and they say, I am shocked at how differently we look and sound depending who's at the front desk. And again, that sends a message to a lot of people about those 2 levels of service for sure. So, how do we set limits on what is acceptable and what does that mean? Manipulative behavior. I'm going to read this out loud. I may have this made into a tattoo. Manipulative behavior by library customers is a sign of inconsistent enforcement of the rules. The problem is the library staff, not the library customer. So, what we do when we have inconsistent enforcement and favor some people over other people, we basically reinforce the idea that some people are entitled and the rules don't apply to them. And this affects how everybody is treated at the front line, including the coworkers who have to deal with the fact that Madge isn't there today and all of her special friends are coming for special favors. And again, this is one of the things that generate problems. So uh, we go back to the old cognitive behavioral standard. The other person is not the quote problem. It's our treatment of the other person, how we respond to their behavior. That's the problem. So, what we have to make sure is that we're consistent again. So, what we want to have is a policy process from the beginning about how we set standards for how everybody behaves, including the customers, where we do it in such a way, and I believe this strongly, transparency breeds trust and respect. So we include the community in the discussion of what should the rules be about behavior. What do we do? What do we don't do? When do we draw the line in the sand? And of course, you talk about buy-in, but people are very conscious of things being fair. That's why I'm a fan of teen advisory boards to help craft the standards for teen behavior in a library. And everybody I've talked to who's had a good working teen advisory board says it has solved so many behavior problems because the teens become very earnest about policing each other and setting a culture like, no, we don't do bullying here. No, you can't shout. And oftentimes the adults don't have to intervene at all because the kids are saying, we made this. We're very proud of this. We're working on this together, which means that whatever kind of policies you put in, we have public meetings and so on. I always think that it's a mistake for a library board and director, however you do it with your library, to implement policies without input from the community and the staff about unintended consequences. And it's wonderful when someone can say to you, I don't agree with the new policy you have, but I think that you implemented it fairly. And that's the key. Meetings and advisory boards, making sure people have input. Again, inviting the professional advice. And what I call engaging the media, meaning that in the things that you're posting on your social media, your newspaper editorials, your posters or whatever, a constant education process to the community so that not only the community, but the media is not surprised when there's a problem about the enforcement of some rule. You know, one way to earn the media's support is to let them know something is happening. They're good, quick studies, but there's a lot of stuff in the world they don't know. So let them know from the beginning what's going on. Makes it much easier if they have to cover the news, if they understand from the beginning the library's point of view and why that rule was there. And please, not too many signs in the library. Make them common sense. Don't use jargon, right? So the whole process is something where people say, oh, I know about that. I read about it. I heard about it before I came to the library. I have the information I need, and I trust. I trust the libraries doing their best to do a good job. So what are some of the mistakes? Too many rules, too many signs. The rules dominate the interaction people have with each other. We treat old ladies who are yelling differently from teenagers who are making less noise, and we give a pass to the old ladies, but we chastise the teenagers. You have good rules in place, but nobody enforces them, or few people do. Doesn't work to have the rules in place if people don't do it. And you don't have a way to test or evaluate the rules. I worked with the city of Longmont on some of these issues a couple of years ago. They were a city overwhelmed by a kind of opportunistic criminal class that kind of moved in and make things difficult for everybody. And one of the first things they did was to make sure they had a way of keeping track of what was going on, kind of a baseline, so they could look 6 months later and say, are the initiatives we're doing actually respecting people, but at the same time reducing the difficult incidents that were happening? So do we know that what we're doing is actually working or not? Or are we just blindly doing things, hope that they're going to work? So here's another assignment. And if I was there in person with you folks, I'd have you write this down in front of me before we talk about it. How many employees would be able to describe accurately the rules regarding unacceptable behavior? You'd be surprised how many people wouldn't be able to do this. I was working with a large university in the West on some of these issues. We had 50 managers in the room who were all experienced folks. They all were direct supervisors and managers of students, student workers. And I asked the question, how do you fire a student? Everyone had a different opinion. We had them write them all down, went to HR, got the manual. Of those 50 experienced library personnel, 4 got it right. And so again, we can't just assume people know what the rules are. And we have to, in some cases, even have, they say, yeah, yeah, I know the rules. And they say, okay, what are the criteria for calling the police? Well, I don't know. Okay. We want to make sure people don't fall into that. And remember, they'll just tell you they know. You have to have some way of saying, okay, you say you understand this. Say back to me what the rule is. Not that the language is exact, but they have the concept down. So what we want to do is to not engage emotionally. And you can't really tell from this photo, but the trick is this is a kitty looking in the mirror. Okay. It's amazing how we impact each other. It takes two. If you back off emotionally from what's going on, most of the time the other person is kind of yelling into space and they tend to calm down too. Cops talk about this all the time. It takes two. So sometimes one of the issues, and between you and me, I sometimes find this more in university libraries than public libraries, but it's any library where you have what I call smart cookies, right? Everybody in a library is smart, but then you have that subject matter expert, um, librarian in the reference desk, or someone who's been there for 50 years and has 40 PhDs, someone who's just smart, smart, smart. So suddenly the exchange with the person who's come to the library is who knows more, right? Or I have more credentials than you. Or I'm sorry, that's the way, not the way to pronounce that author's name, or you made a mistake there. That's not what it's about. It's just about saying, I'm going to help you and let you go back to your real life outside the library, or I'm going to help you and you're going to be sitting quietly doing the research you need to do, or the reading, or whatever it is you want to do. But I'm not going to make it a battle and sort of say, I'm not going to shut up until you admit that I am right and you are wrong. And by the way, that's how I was raised. It took me a long time to realize conversations were not battles for supremacy. Some people have that sing song, oh, how are you voice that they use with elderly people. Nope. And this is a line that I learned at a literacy conference. Domination under the guise of service. Is that scary or what? And it was about the fact that sometimes people who work in the helping professions like the idea that their way of helping people shows their own superiority. And that again, we want people who can treat other people like peers, like equals, knowing that everybody knows more about the world than you do. And wherever the time and place is to you to argue about who knows more than someone else, it's probably not at the front desk of a library. Let them have that argument with someone else. And if they say, no, I think the author's name is this, and you know it's wrong, you can always say, well, let me look under that. Oh, okay. I can't find it under that. Well, let me make a suggestion. Just for fun, let's look at this other thing because sometimes I make that mistake too and get the authors confused, right? Rather than saying, "Oh, you ignorant person." And sometimes again, tone of voice, the look on the face. Stop arguing. And here are some of the tricks that police officers use and I've used and other libraries use, okay? It's about the library. You provide the information, find a way to say yes or agree with them. Maybe find a point of commonality, right? I have a neighbor who, John, great neighbor, he hates my politics. He hates my politics. And I don't impose my politics on other people, but he will actually stand on the front lawn and yell at me. I mean, not even say hello. Doesn't even say hello, Pat. He just starts in. And what I do when he does that, I said, "Oh," I said, "John, how are your roses? How are the kitties?" He's a big kitty rescuer. And you know what? The other day he knocked on the door, handed me a business card, and he said, "Here's the best guy in town to build that cat condominium you want in the back." You know, the cat condos and the I think they call them catios sometimes. He built ours. He's great. Tell him I sent you. He'll give you a discount and everything. Well, that's a lot different from him standing on the front lawn screaming at me because of my political beliefs. So we want to try to avoid politics as we try to find a way to find commonality. You know, ask their opinion about something safe. It's easy for me because I'm a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan. I can always engage someone in a conversation about local sports or the Chicago Cubs. So this is another one, and this is sort of getting a little feedback from other people that you know. Do you know your own triggers? You might ask your friends and family and colleagues, you know, are there things that either I say and do that tend to really annoy other people, or are there things that other people say to me that somehow I'm not able to stay the calm, collected adult? And don't be surprised if they say to you, oh, thank goodness you're finally asking. I've been hoping you've been asking for 15 years. So we have to kind of be good humored and humble about our own mistakes. and things that we can do. I've had several situations with clients that it just was butting heads. So I asked a third person to sit in with us and was very clear with the client. The person was acting as a coach for me. That's why they were there. And after the client left, I would turn to the person and say, "Well, what do you think?" And I would get like theater notes on my behavior. You're probably not realizing that, Pat. When they said this, you rolled your eyes. And when they said this, you smirked. And when they said this, you interrupted them 3 times. And it has improved how I treat other people. So, what would be this issue of distractions and alternatives? How do we disengage, in other words? Here's some things that I've seen and people have talked about that work pretty well. Back in Alameda County in California, they have a toy basket at every desk in the system. And I have to say that in the new days, this might be more difficult to do unless you got little cheapo wrapped toys. And by the way, even in the old days before the pandemic, they would buy little cheap toys that could be washed in a washing machine with bleach or something that was a giveaway, so that if somebody came up to the front desk with their kids and the kids were tired and misbehaving and so on, um, the adults in the library, and it was a small expense, would hand a small toy that acted as a very good distraction. If someone is really upset with the library and yelling at you, one of the things at every station, the complaint form, comments and complaints, where you hand the person the complaint in the form and say, "We take complaints seriously here at our library." And if you have to escort them with the distancing to a place where they can sit down, some libraries don't have places to sit down anymore, but you can also say, "Please, you know, go outside, fill it out, come bring it back in, whatever's safe and right for you." um, because the act of them walking away from the desk where they're angry, sitting down and writing something down in and itself calms people down. People who use this technique say when they look over to where the person was sitting, they're gone because this helped them kind of come back to themselves, right? And go, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to be here." If it's a customer who comes in, maybe prepare something like they like, have that magazine ready for them or something that you can distract them with. Sometime a glass of water. And I remind people that chronic dehydration is a problem with seniors. And it's kind of good to have paper cups and water around because it will manifest itself in people being upset. And again, it's a distraction action. Here, take the glass of water or the water bottle, whatever it is, sit down. um, I'll be able to come and talk to you about your situation in 3 or 4 minutes. Does it work with everybody? No, works with a lot of people pretty well. Another thing, asking them for advice. Like I asked John for advice about how we could build this nice screened in porch for our kitties and what that would mean. And there are times when you just have to walk away. You just have to say thank you and walk away. So if you are behind a protected desk, one of the protocols you folks have to figure out is where are the times where you can walk away, walk around, and direct the person out the door, or you can do something else. But I think we don't think about the service desks very well because they're often designed, particularly the older ones, to trap the employee behind the desk so they don't have a way to kind of change the environment that they're all working in. Um, generate opinions and choices, options and choices rather. What are the different ways that we can help the person? There was a library in New Jersey that had a weekly meeting with their staff, big library, multiple branches, and it was a meeting at each of the branches for just a few minutes every week before the library would open to say what problems came in, where were the times we had to say no. And then they would brainstorm and what can all of us do next time, so that people added more tools to their toolbox, if you think it that way. In my work studying conflict and communication, I'm always looking for new ways to do things. It's like being a cook and always looking for new recipes. Learn the customer's goals. What are they trying to achieve? Is there somewhere else or some way else you can do it? Because frustration can lead to anger, and see if you can get something more interesting than their anger. Even if you have to interrupt them, change the subject, find something that you think will be more appealing to them. It's the substitution technique that parents use. Okay, put down the hammer, here's a cookie. Works with adults as well. Can you say no, thank you, even if it's an issue that you think is really important? Can you, in your mind, back off and interrupt and deflect what's going on? Here's a formula that actually was designed by some therapists in dealing with people who are out of control. You thank them, you set the limit, and you offer an alternative. Thank you for coming to the library. Um, the behavior you're doing is keeping us from um, serving you, and if you continue, we'll have to ask you to leave. However, I can set you up if you want to wait over there for a couple of minutes. I can help you find the books that you're looking for or whatever it is. And sometimes you have to walk away and hang up. But the whole thing is you have to stay calm. And on more than one occasion, running my little business, I have said to someone, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom. I think I lost a contact. I don't wear contacts." Or, "Excuse me, I have to go out and check the meters outside our building." There are no meters outside the building because sometimes I have to go splash cold water on my face or do something different just for me to be able to calm down. So developing that option frame of mind rather than saying, oh, these terrible, horrible people, how can we lower most of the anxiety that people bring with them and say, we're not going to run out of options in how we deal with people? We'll always have another idea in place. Here's one more idea of something that we can do. A friend of mine, Peter McLaughlin, who's sadly no longer with us, he said, a sign of leadership is you're the last person to run out of ideas. Let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And that's why I think programs like this are so important. Kind of get you in the, how would you say, of spirit of saying, I need to keep looking for new ideas. And then there's the time where you really have to draw the line in the sand and you have to say, when is it time to call the police? Okay. So the first thing is education. I have family in small towns, and sometimes a sheriff is elected to the county or a town marshal hired, and they're just not the best person in the world, even to the point of, front page scandals about behavior. We had a situation with one town where the mayor said, I want you to help the civic buildings, including the library. And if they call for help, we expect you to make that a priority unless it's an act of crime. And the police chief on his own decided that they weren't going to follow through. And so the poor library, the other buildings, like the community center, would call the cops and nobody would show up. Well, what did this do for the credibility of the mayor and his great initiatives, right? So they had to start from scratch, eventually got rid of that police chief, got one in who was actually more into community policing. But even then, it took a while for the library and the other institutions under the city government to trust what the mayor was saying because they felt they had been burned before. So I know that can happen. Okay. Let's just pretend you're on good terms with your sheriff and all these different people. Be very clear, particularly if you're a smaller agency, who has jurisdiction for what issues. So is this something for the town marshal? Is it something for the local police department? Or if it's something for the sheriff's department? Sometimes people don't even know where the property is or what crimes fall under which jurisdictions. What is it that you can or can't do? What are you not allowed to do? We were working up in Casper, Wyoming, and I was facilitating a meeting with the library and staff and the local sheriff's department on some problems they were having. And the library actually wanted to post the photos of people with criminal records in the lobby of the library. And the sheriff said, no, no, you can't do that. Mm-mm. So sometimes you have good ideas that aren't. Making sure that the rules are in place and they're communicated well, and there is, again, consistent enforcement. So this is a list of books that I think you might find helpful, plus a couple of websites. If I was to start on this, the book that I would start it is at the top, The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, who is one of the country's experts on dealing with workplace violence. And he has great suggestions. common sense suggestions on how to prevent and deal with those kinds of issues. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Tiffany. And Tiffany, did we have any questions or comments from our audience today?
It doesn't look like we have any questions yet.
Hmm.
If anyone would like to ask a question about something specific or for clarification, um, now would be a great time.
Very good. I really think, Tiffany, knowing your and my shared interest, that more libraries should have attack cats on the staff.
Um, I'm not volunteering my crew for
Oh,
sure.
very good. There's a person came to our house when I was a kid. Nobody was there except my mom, and he was very unpleasant. And actually, the house cat Scamp went after him and chased him out of the house because he didn't like the tone of voice he was using with my mother. I'm not making that up. Looks like we have a couple of comments coming in.
Um, let's see. A suggestion from Hannah. One tip I like is putting people on hold if you need a quick break so that you
Oh,
both have time to regroup. Very sensible.
excellent. Excellent. Yes. Thank you.
Another thing that I like is if you have um, somebody who's insisting to talk to a manager, keep business cards at the service points for your branch manager, for your director, whoever you would normally direct them to. And um, people really, maybe they'll call, maybe they won't, but it gives them a point of contact. Uh,
Excellent.
Another comment, before the pandemic, of course, we would give coloring pages and crayons for fidgety kids. That's always helpful.
Lovely. Lovely.
Yes,
Do we have time for one quick story?
sure.
Check it, Tiffany. Okay, I'll tell you who it was because it was wonderful. It was the North Dakota State Library, and people would treat it like a public library, and people would come in, whatever. And Mike Jogstetter, at the time the state librarian, had a military background, so he created a thing called the Officer of the Day, and there was a unisex um, coat, right, sports coat with a button that said manager on it that was back in the staff room. So if that angry self-important citizen would come in and say, I want to speak to the manager, whoever was at the desk would say, just a moment, go into the staff room, take the coat, grab someone in the hallway and say, put on the coat. And then the person would come up and say, yes, I'm the manager. What can I do for you? Right? And they had great fun. They would grab someone, from shipping. They would grab a secretary from a different department of the state government, right? And all that person was someone important that would satisfy them. And from what I was heard, the citizens never caught on that it was like, get the coat, right? Anyway,
Same
I'm not
coat, different
suggesting
person.
you do that, but I think it worked for the North Dakota State Library very well for several years.
Well, and sometimes it's just a different person. It's very hard if someone is committed to whatever they're asking about. It's sometimes hard for them to back down to the person they're talking to. But
Right?
if you have a different person come in, it's sometimes easier for them to say, "Oh, you know what? That's fine. We'll work it out. It's okay."
Yes.
Does
Excellent.
anybody else have any questions? Any situations, any comments, concerns? You have the expert on the line.
I'm learning along with everyone else, right?
So far, no questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If we have anything last minute, feel free to